Good evening, everyone. My name is Megan Lowe, and I'm the Alumni Relations Manager for the Faculty of Education at Monash University. I would also like to commence by acknowledging the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land I am today. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. As Ruth mentioned, along with those of you in the room, it is fantastic to have so many of our attendees joining us online tonight. This event turned into an online event, obviously, during COVID, and we're really excited to be able to still run that online, but to offer a face-to-face opportunity for you all to network as well, which is great to have you here. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to those who are joining us from all over the world. We're glad to have you. For those of you whom this is your first Monash Education event since completing your course, we're so happy to see you and welcome back. As you hopefully know, your journey with Monash doesn't end when you complete your studies. You're part of our global community for life, and there are some fantastic opportunities to learn, share and network, just like today, for you to get involved in. These opportunities include social media. You can join us online as we share resources, research and articles in a number of tailored groups. These social media groups also offer an opportunity to discuss your challenges and wins with peers from across the globe. We'll share links to these groups in our post-event email for you to click through, or you can search for them yourselves on Facebook and LinkedIn using the group names on the screen. We have a Facebook group that welcomes all alumni from across the faculty, and 2 LinkedIn groups, one for educational and developmental psychology alumni and one for leaders in education, that is alumni of our leadership focused courses, or alum from other courses who are working as leaders in educational spaces. Mentoring is another great way to stay connected. Monash offers an alumni to alumni mentoring program where you can be matched as a mentor or a mentee with another Monash alumni whose experiences match what you're looking for. There is also an annual alumni to student mentoring program, which you can be a part of. Keep an eye on your emails in 2023 for more information on next year's program. We have a range of opportunities for you to share your experiences virtually or at events with prospective and current Monash students. If you're interested in participating in panel sessions or information sessions, please email eduevents@monash.edu. There's information on the card on your table if you're in person, and that will be emailed through to you if you're viewing online. As an alum of Monash University, you also have access to a whole host of other benefits, including access to the Monash Library and other discounts. You can find out more information about these by visiting monash.edu/alumni/benefits. And again, these links will be sent to you after the event. We also provide our alumni with a range of professional development opportunities, including events, tools and resources. These include Teach Space, where our academics provide information and articles on current research in an easy to digest format. Events, so we host a huge number of free public events on a range of topics to do with education, psychology and counselling that we would love you to join us at across the year. And we're able to provide certificates of attendance for professional development if you do require those. We also offer short courses, so a range of professional development programs suitable for educators, school leaders, support staff, psychologists, counsellors and the wider community. And again, we'll send you links to all of this in the post-event email. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope it's going to be a fantastic discussion. I know that it will. We have a fantastic panel here for you. So join in, get involved, and we can't wait to hear your insights. I'll now hand back over to Ruth to introduce our incredible panel. Thank you. All of it's good. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Megan. Great to hear all the resources available to the Monash Education alumni. It makes me feel a bit jealous that my own university don't do that for me as an alumni. So moving into our topic tonight, just as a bit of an introduction, I think there's been a number of recent studies that have really emphasise the need for all sectors to consider how they can more effectively support and address exclusion and discrimination experienced by LGBTQIA+ youth. We've had a recent report that's actually led by one of our panel members, Blake Cutler, focusing on queer young people in Australia. And this report really has illustrated that queer young people can experience significant stress in education context, can be discriminated against in the workplace, and experience poorer levels of mental health and a lack of support. There's also been a national study undertaken by La Trobe University, drawing on responses from 6,500 LGBTQIA+ young people aged 14 to 21. And this study really highlights similar themes. 60% of young people reported having felt unsafe and uncomfortable at secondary schools due to their sexuality or gender identity. This was also true for 33% in TAFE and 29% of those at university. 81% of young people surveyed in this report reported high or very high levels of psychological distress. So these findings are why tonight's event really is so important. We've all, by being here, we're taking a really important step in acknowledging that more work needs to be done in this space and recognizing that inequity and discrimination cannot continue. We are all responsible for creating environments that are safe and inclusive and where queer young people can feel confident and comfortable to be themselves and be recognized. We've got an awesome panel of experts here to talk to and discuss some of these issues, and I'm really looking forward to hearing them talk in more depth and debate some of these issues further. So without further delay, I'll introduce our panel. First up, we have our wonderful facilitator who's going to be guiding the discussion tonight, Dr. Karen Lambert. Karen's a senior lecturer in the School of Curriculum Teaching and Inclusive Education within the faculty. Next to Karen, we've got Blake Cutler, who is a researcher and PhD candidate at Monash University. Next to Blake, we've got Ash Raja, a researcher and PhD candidate within Monash Education. Then we have Dr. Lisa Hunter, also a senior lecturer within the faculty at Monash. And finally, Dr. Letteris Patlamozlagou, sorry, Letteris, practicing that, who again is a lecturer within the faculty at Monash. So I'll hand over Karen to take us through the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruth. Thanks everyone for coming along. We're hoping that you'll walk away with a little bit of glitter today, a little bit of insight and some ideas about how to do better, be better, and ally better. What I would like to do is just remind you that we're a resource for you. We come with sets of views, we come with sets of opinions, and we also come with some life experiences that have got us to here. Some of them may be pleasant, some of them may not have been quite so pleasant, as might be the case for many of the young people that we see. So what I'm going to invite the panel to do, just so that we get a little bit of that background, I'm just going to ask them one at a time to tell us just a little bit about themselves. And maybe what they're really interested in terms of their research, perhaps an experience from school themselves, or something that you think's maybe valuable little snippet to share with our audience. Blake, you look pumped and pimped in that jacket, so I'm just going to throw to you to start with.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Blake. I use he, they pronouns, and I would also like to acknowledge that we're meeting on unceded Wurundjeri country. I've also spent most of my life on unceded Gumbaynggirr country, so a lot of the experiences I'll be sharing tonight occurred on unceded land up in New South Wales. After finishing my degree at Monash, I began teaching in a country high school, and unfortunately that wasn't a very safe experience for me, so I ended up coming back to Monash. I'm now working as a researcher in the faculty, looking at how we can better use the research that is produced in higher education in the classroom, and looking at the challenges that are involved in that and how we can support teachers to feel comfortable in their ally work and to challenge some of the norms that are embedded in our education system.
Ash.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ash, and I'm a PhD candidate here at Monash Education. I use she, they pronouns. I was originally from Singapore. I migrated here for higher education, and I'm currently researching queer Asian women experiences here in higher education. And essentially, I'm actually really interested in looking at the diversity of the queer experience. That's in the simplest way I can put it. Part of that is because I think there are little sectors within the queer communities that needs to be researched within them. So that's what I'm really interested in looking at. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on too.
Hi everyone, Lisa Hunter. My pronouns are they, them, theirs and it. I've been in education pretty much all my life, I think, and that's a long time. And I was originally interested in how gender worked, but of course, through my education system, I understood that gender was man, woman, male, female, boy, girl. I didn't even have those nuances to understand the difference between sex and gender. And it was only through teacher education after a university education that started to become clear to me. So part of my journey is about how through education, we can actually educate our teachers, and the teachers can do the work in the school because we work on a high level of ignorance. And that ignorance leads to the fear for the work that teachers are really competent at doing, and some great teachers that we lose as well because they're not safe spaces for teachers, let alone students. And that's the same for parents as well. So, you know, I've had a lot of time in the class space, but I've also moved into the research space, currently working with a group of people with lived experience around intersex variations and how our education system can pay attention to that. But, you know, the bigger picture as well, how teacher education and education in all sorts of spaces, including surfing, how we can pay attention to the work that gender does on people's bodies so that they can essentially thrive, because I don't think it's good enough just to accept and include. We actually want to build you know, the sorts of structures that means that people can do what they're here to do.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lefteris Patlamazoglu. I am a counselling psychologist and a counsellor also, and I'm a lecturer in the counselling psychology programs in the Faculty of Education. So most of my my career in clinical practice and counselling practice has focused on working with couples and individuals who are or who have a child who is LGBTQIA+ identifying. Most recently, my work has focused on supporting young people with mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and grief, especially. And my research has focused on these areas as well. And this is what drives my work. The possibility of supporting or training emerging counselors and psychologists to support LGBTIQ+ young people in a more effective way.
How was that? Was that better? The volume? Still not quite. Yeah, still not. If you could pop it up a little bit more. Thank you. Thanks, team. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Karen Lambert, and I'm a little bit of a cross-section of everyone. I think I've got a little bit of mental health research going on, a little bit of mental health work in my classroom teaching, community sport, involved with community sport, done a little bit around the Pride Cup as well. So trying to keep my fingers in the gender and sexuality pies in Victoria. I think my experiences as a young person growing up in rural New South Wales in country towns probably mirrors a little bit of Blake's experiences of school, really not being quite sure who or what I was and what I should be or could be was a little bit foreclosed because there was really only two options and there was nothing kind of that explained why somebody would just want to just play sport. There really needed to be that third box. And so I guess I want to throw out the idea about our experiences perhaps in society and as generally queer identified people. How did we find school? How have you found university? How did you find your first teaching, Lefteris, when you were working with your first clients? Those sorts of things. Has anyone got a small anecdote that they might like to share at this point? Ash,
Yeah, sure. So I think I mentioned earlier that I grew up in Singapore. It's a pretty small city-state in Southeast Asia, if you don't know where it is. We are pretty conservative and it have been, still are. So there's not a lot of queer representation or visibility, or there's no positive representation at least of queer families. So I grew up in school in a pretty religious school, might I add. So you'd be punished if people knew that you were queer. So a lot of my life, I've had that part of myself hidden, or have had to negotiate when I hide it and when I decide to disclose it. It's very exhausting throughout schooling life. I've had it's a mixed bag though for me, mixed sentiments, because when I went to university, a big part of it was to kind of free myself from the chains of that sort of environment. So I went very far away. I moved to the US, but I don't know why I decided to move to a southern state in the US. So I think it kind of followed through the difficulties. But I think it's a mixed bag for me, because on one hand, I've had those pretty difficult experiences, but on the other, I feel like it became an avenue for me to kind of be freer, to be who I was and to come into myself and to find my chosen family in school. So I think on one hand, I'm quite thankful for my schooling experiences, because I certainly didn't have that growing up in my family. It was very, very rough. Yeah, that was what some of my schooling experiences was like.
Left Terrace, what are young people that are maybe coming in, or their parents coming in? What are they typically saying is going on for their children?
Yeah, okay. First of all, the fact that they're coming in, or if the students are coming in, the children are coming in, then it means they feel supported enough to seek support, right? Because most of the times, it would be difficult for LGBTQIA+ people to access support due to the fact that there aren't many options, or because they fear that they will be discriminated. Now, the parents of those who are LGBTQIA+, usually the most common reason that they come to counselling for is because they don't know how to support the children. They know they want to support the children, they don't know how to do it. Very rarely these days they will come in to say, can you try to make my child think differently? Which is very triggering to me. So yeah, they don't know how to support it. They don't have the means possibly. So there was some tools.
Do they talk about school? Do they say how school maybe makes them feel?
The parents or the children, or both?
Both.
Yeah. The children talk a lot about school. The parents want to know what's going on at school, because that's the environment where they can't oversee or control the child as much, right? So yeah, they talk about school. It is a big part of their lives. Young people tend to, if they can't find support from within the school system, that's usually they will seek support outward. But usually they find it, varying experiences. Certain groups within the school will be supportive, while others will be exclusive or exclusionary.
Yeah. Thank you. Blake, I know some of your research has gone down the mental health and wellbeing. What's it telling you about young people's experiences?
One of the key things that we were looking at exploring in our research was we didn't want to take a deficit perspective to looking at queer young people's lives. We didn't want to locate the issues within queer young people. And so what we were trying to pinpoint were those factors within the school community that were contributing to those mental health outcomes that Left Terrace was talking about. And one of the key ones that we identified was the relationships with other students. So it's your cisgender, so students whose gender identities align with their sex assigned at birth, and also heterosexual, so straight students. It was interacting with students that were the key sources of significant stress. So queer young people were 33% more likely to experience significant stress about interacting with other students. And for us, that was a really key statistic, because it helped to shift that focus from focusing on a deficit perspective of queer young people to going, hey, the issue is actually a broader reflection of how our school is set up institutionally, socially, and culturally, that then you begin to open up spaces for more productive action.
Wow. So Lisa Hunter, I guess things have probably changed in the decades that you did your own research. I'm hoping they have anyway, but sometimes I do wonder. But Blake's hit on a few really important things there about schools as places and what they can offer. I mean, from the past to kind of now, can you give us a bit of a reflection about maybe some of the things you've seen, some of the shifts, and maybe talk a little bit to that whole connection thing?
Sure. Anyone taught early 80s, late 70s? Well, I can't get you to reflect then. I think there was quite a lot going on then, and interestingly, we had a very good conference a couple of days ago that talked about have we gone backwards since then, in terms of louder?
Yeah, a bit louder.
In terms of our understanding of difference, if we can use that sort of word, and connecting with kids. So as a teacher, you know, my education wasn't crash hot in teacher education to understand what was going on. But I remember my heart breaking because there was a year 8 boy who was being bullied by the other kids. And I wasn't quite sure how to help him because of his effeminate nature. And there was also a girl who was very sporty, athletic, being bullied and using derogatory terms around sexuality. Most of these kids hadn't figured out their sexuality, so that sort of wasn't part of the discussion, and we didn't have that language. Now in teacher education, we've got some fabulous programs and fabulous resources, and Victoria has got some of the best, but to what extent they're engaged with and even how we bring it into our teacher education program, we're not there yet, or we got there nearly and then it sort of came back underneath again with backlash politics such as the All of Us resources. So I keep thinking about those students and some of my teaching colleagues who have left because they didn't feel that school was not at all a thriving place, but certainly not even a safe space. So yes, I think we've made some big changes in some ways because some students now who are coming into university do understand what the acronym is, they understand the flag, they understand ways to be bringing in, using education as a way to help other kids understand what they're feeling is unfair and wrong, but with a language to be able to teach to the kids to stop some of that bullying, which is also sometimes happening by parents and staff as well, and broader society. So at the same time, we've got kids dealing with some of these issues, and you know we saw it last year where some individual students in the who were identifying as transgender became targets at a national level, and you know those sorts of things are. When we think about human rights as well as the idea of thriving in schools and even the notion of education. And I have a lot of fun with my students because the notion of queering is about trying to question what's there. Isn't that what universities are about? So we can talk about identities, but we can also talk about what's the purpose of not just being normal and not just being, even understanding where does normal come from. And most people aren't normal. So being able to challenge those things, I love the kids in the middle years, they challenge the schooling system. So these sorts of notions are ones that we have had evidence of in our education system for a long time, but we seem to sort of revert to normal and dominant forms that wipes a whole lot of people out from really learning and thriving and transformation through education, really.
So do you have a sense that there's like an upward trajectory?
In some instances, and in others, it's, you know, the backlash makes it very difficult.
Continues.
So it really depends on the context. I see wonderful things that are much better than 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But I also, you know, get quite upset. I just recently was interviewing pre-service teacher education students, and one woman was talking about the boys went out to play hockey, the girls went to do stuff about puberty, which was essentially a biology lesson. And that was their sexuality and relationships education for their whole schooling career. So, you know, she felt quite fearful about teaching relationships and sexuality education because she felt like she didn't know what lesbian meant or to try and understand what transgender was.
Mm.
So we have a lot of work to do, but we also have some great examples of staff, parents, students who are, they're leading the way through modelling.
And hopefully you folks will get a chance to talk to each other about those resources and assets that you have, as well as look at a few resources that we've tagged and flagged for you to dig into and have a little bit of a play with, pulling them off the shelf, so to speak, for you. Left Terrace, I'm going to throw to you because I'm really interested in Lisa Hunter talked about puberty. We just had a chat about parents and young people coming along. What are typically young people presenting with? What kinds of feelings, emotions, maybe conditions, behaviours? I don't really want to, compartmentalize, mental health problems and those sorts of things, but they're presenting with a range of things, aren't they?
Yeah. So when we're looking specifically at LGBTQIA plus young people, there's a range, and of course, each person is an individual. So, every person will experience these emotions, behaviors, and physical sensations and cognitions, like the thoughts, differently and possibly in different order. So they tend to compare themselves to others while also trying to figure out who they are. So trying to figure out their sexuality and gender identities, their social identities, the sense of belonging, their self-esteem, confidence, and then, of course, worrying about school, worrying about the future, who are they going to become, will they be liked? They tend to be, focused on a range of things. In terms of mental health specifically, we know that about, I guess not so mental health, it's about, in terms of, let's say, the way that they experience the school system, for instance, we know that about 40% of young people in Australia, of young LGBTIQ plus people in Australia in the last year alone, experienced harassment, verbal harassment in schools. And about 80% of the same population experienced suicidal ideation, which means thoughts of suicide, in the last year as well. In the lifetimes. And about 60% or so of them sought support from a mental health professional or a teacher. So comparing this to the broader non-LGBTIQA plus population, the rates are about up to 5% higher of experiencing mental health issues, mainly depression, anxiety, and trauma. The sense of belonging is something that, it's a broad, it includes connection with others, finding who you are, and then what is your place in the context in which you find yourself. We find that, that people who are LGBTIQA plus tend to have a lower sense of belonging compared to the broader population. And of course, this is linked to academic performance. It is linked to social life satisfaction as well. So we know that it's a chain reaction or a pervasive ripple effect. And that's very central as well to their experiences.
Thanks, Lefteris. I'm going to jump to you, Ash, because I know your research is sort of talking about that a bit about that belonging piece. And it might be in higher education, but also the people you've spoken to have been in school. And I think also the intersectional lens that you bring to that. So I guess there's two things in there. Talk us through your intersectional lens. And then maybe just give us an example of this sense of belonging or not that maybe some of your participants are talking about or experiencing.
Sure. So my research, I'm interested in looking at communities that are culturally and linguistically diverse. So people that are in schools that perhaps are from non-white backgrounds, and I'm interested in looking at how culture affects the experience, because I think research generally shows that a queer Asian person, for instance, of the people that I've spoken to, experience very different kind of layered discrimination versus somebody who is queer and white, for instance. So a big part of that is navigating not just the homophobia, but also the racism, the sexism, and all the different things that comes along with that. And apart from that, also negotiating how you might find support if support doesn't exist at home. What happens if it doesn't also exist in schools? Then where do you go? So a lot of the women that I've spoken to, that I've had the privilege of working with, often talk about how they live two lives. Keeping part of themselves suppressed or hidden away from everybody, maybe from home, maybe from people who don't accept them. But also, somebody mentioned it as living between a rock and a hard place. So it's like wherever you go, you're never going to feel like you belong. And so that has, as Lefteris mentioned, a lot of mental health implications, a lot of lack of belonging, a lot of lack of academic, it affects your academic abilities and all that sort of stuff. And so what I'm trying to see here is what can we do in that space to promote that sense of belonging? So a big part of that is looking at an intersectional experience. How are the experiences different? If we don't understand them, then there's no problem. If it doesn't, you can't see them, then how do we fix them? So my research is trying to kind of unpack what those things are, how we are going to try to make that better within the queer communities itself. For me specifically, coming into higher education, and I can only speak from my own experience with this, but coming into higher education and having access to queer support, I never really accessed them. And when I speak to the women that I've interviewed, a lot of them say they don't really access them, not because they don't think that it's valuable to have, but because they feel like it's not made for them, if that makes any sense. It's not something that they're comfortable with. It feels very exposing. It feels like if they walk in there, then other people in their communities will see them. What will happen to them then? So it's a safety issue. It's a belonging issue. And so I think we, as everybody in the room as educators could probably do a little bit of work in terms of looking at how it would work for intersectional communities as well.
I think that's really important because our schools, with the dates on the front of them I went to the Monash shop today and it says, like some date that it was founded. And I'm all like, oh, okay. So 1958 or something. I'm all like, oh, okay, that's not very old. So they're built on colonial history. They're built on ideas around coming in and changing particular ways in thinking. And we do know that from Indigenous cultures and loss as well. And so it's the walls that need to change. It's the people. It's the challenging of the various intersections, which includes our bodies, but also the very spaces that we're occupying. Because as you say, if you don't see them, then we don't see them. So this lens of intersectionality has certainly been something that we've been looking through for some time. And it's not the I in LGBTQIA+. But we will get to that because I know that acronym keeps getting bigger and bigger as well. Blake, I know you've been doing a little bit around this intersectional space. So what have you got to add for that? And, what causes it? What goes on? How might we understand it a bit better, I guess?
Yeah, it's something that took me as a racialized white person. It took me actually going out and learning about intersectionality to realize that, my experience as a racialized white queer person is very different to perhaps say an Indigenous young person's experience of the school system. And so it took me not just learning about intersectionality, but sort of unlearning my whiteness and unlearning my privilege to realize the complexity of there's hundreds and hundreds of research papers unpacking what intersectionality is, but we also see how different people's experiences in different contexts, they're super, super different. So it makes it really difficult to apply, look at intersectionality through one lens in this context, and it maps to every context that you can think of. It's such a context-specific and complex concept to work through. That's why I'm such a big advocate of teachers being given the tools to think about these concepts and then applying it in their specific context. Because even within a single school, the way you look intersectionality at your practice, the way you look critically at your practice will vary between even classrooms that are next to each other, which, you know, my go-to saying is, you know, this is complex work. And I don't think saying it's complex work gives justice to the actual complexity of it. Yeah.
Thanks, because it is complex work, but it's not a throwaway kind of idea to say it's complex. It's actually an opportunity to jump in and go, well, let's kind of get messy and start to unravel it. And I think that's where the term queering can actually be a really good verb about what that actually entails. A flag, a poster, a lanyard, small acts can have a great deal of impact. Lefteris, intersectionality in counselling and psych, is it a thing?
It is. It's become a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's always been a thing. In theory, we see it more and more lately. And I thought I was using it correctly, but over time I realized that I wasn't. So to acknowledge that intersectionality as a term has been coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, an American queer woman of color. And so I used to think that, okay, let's say I had a client, right, who was a transgender young person who migrated from Southeast Asia. And so she was transgender, a transgender woman. She was a migrant and of Southeast Asian background as well, living in Australia. So these identities, I was trying to find research and I was trying to understand her experience by looking at research that looks at trans only, and then at Southeast Asians only, and then at migrants only. And I thought I could put it all together, and I thought, you know, they could just add to each other, but I wasn't using it right. So I thought I was using intersectionality properly, but then I understood the complexities, I guess, or the depth of intersectionality, which is not the additive model of you know, one identity adding complications onto another or adding experiences onto another, rather than each one multiplying and creating a novel experience that is more than the sum of the parts. So back to your question. It is becoming, there's emerging research on intersectionality in counselling and psychology specifically. It's a growing space. I think there's still a way to go. And I think as long as, you know, we try to see a person for who they are authentically, rather than trying to see how they fit a theory or how they tick certain boxes within the frameworks that we know of, and we push all this aside and we go back to the standards of, you know, those of you who have worked in counseling and psychology, one of the most basic, the most foundational concepts is unconditional positive regard, trying to see the person for who they are, trying to see things from their perspective, or put ourselves in the shoes and ask them, what is it like being you? What is it like, you know, maybe we've read about research regarding trans migrants in Australia from Southeast Asia, but I want to hear, what is your experience? What do you have to tell me? What could you tell me? Yeah, about you.
And I'm going to go, any teachers in here, it's probably like, it's actually about taking the time to get to know your students and to be willing to have those kinds of conversations, because it's pretty weird this day and age to be sort of a little bit afraid about, you know, some color or different ways of thinking or body shapes or abilities or skin colors or genders or sexualities. It seems a bit odd to me sometimes that those are the markers of of how we can actually speak to people and what we choose to say to people. But having a conversation with a young person doesn't need to happen in a clinical setting. It can happen in any setting. And I know my experiences with young people through health and physical education are quite different to a mathematics teacher's experience or an English teacher's experiences. We are permitted certain types of ways to engage with young people and their bodies, for example, in different spaces. So I think that's a really important thing. Listening unconditionally and asking some questions about, like, who are you? What are your experiences and how might I come to know about them, that is going to, you know, deal with some of these little bits and pieces, the performance, the isolation, the sense of belonging, et cetera, et cetera. I think, Lisa Hunter, I know you're a big fan of intersectionality, always have been, but when we were setting up for this, one of their big things was to say, have we got the right flag? And I went, oh. And a few of the people organising the panel just went, what do you mean, Karen, the right flag? So Lisa Hunter, I'd like you to tell us about the colours and why it's actually not just a rainbow anymore, why it's got brown and purple and blues. Could you, because I think that's about intersectionality, right? That's about it. So maybe this is an opportunity for some information. Go for it.
Oh, everybody might know.
Oh, they may. I don't know. Let's see how you
Well,
go.
the ones that you see there are more recent at the Progress Pride flag. What used to be called the rainbow flag. Each colour represents something. So, for instance, the red, which is usually on the top, but we're down under, so maybe that's why we're querying it a little. But that's about life and blood. Orange is about healing. When we look at purple, that would be at the bottom, is about spirit. So each colour has a reason for being there. And it's an interesting history, actually, so I won't bore you with the whole history and I'll get to it. But the more recent additions of the brown, black is to represent the fact that people of colour and Black people and Indigenous people, you know, they've been working this area for a long time and often gone recognised. So a lot of the pride work that was represented by the rainbow, it was often the white people who were being acknowledged and recognised. So it's an acknowledgement actually of that it's not just a white space, and also the idea of trans in there with the white, blue, and the pink. So there are all sorts of wonderful colours and backgrounds and Zoom backgrounds that you can find now that also acknowledges the valuable work of allies. And for many people in schools, it's the allies, it's the teachers who understand what's going on, they learn the language. It might be as simple as wearing an allied badge so kids can see that there's a presence there and that it's okay not to be a word that most kids won't hear in their education, and that's heteronormative or heterosexual. Just like understanding that it's not just about a gender binary or a sex binary, but you know, we've got a lot of work to do to develop enough of a sophisticated language and understanding to really understand where the roots of some of these problems are. And I noticed somebody up here had about the patriarchy. So heteronormativity and patriarchy are often words that drop off the agenda. They're still a bit too dangerous to talk about. But when we look at our histories and where our ideas about what's okay, what's not okay, even our perceptions about how people can be, if I talk about the Year 8 boy again, why is it so bad for him to walk the way that he walked, for example? It was really important for him to be whoever he was, but for all of the pressures that went on him and probably some of the kids that you see, we don't need to be like that, but we've got a lot of education to do because, you know, religion has a lot to do with it, and it's a complicated discussion that we're really yet to have in a significant way in Australia. There's sort of some moves, and in Parliament we're starting to see a little bit more sophistication around what constitutes woman, But I think it's quite a while before we talk about some of these more complicated intersectional aspects of who gets to count as being eligible for a good education and human rights, basically.
Yeah, fundamentally. And maybe politicians aren't the ones to be having those conversations.
There's some great politicians as well who do some good work.
For sure. Thank you. No, I'm just going to quote you, Lisa Hunter, and then I'm going to throw a question to the other panel members about your quote. You have suggested that schools and society tend to take a deficit approach to LGBTIQA plus matters, fearful rather than knowledgeable, and that mental health outcomes are associated with this. And the ignoring of educational outcomes at the same time. So, Blake, I'm going to throw to you. What is it? Come on, this is going to be a great research paper, this one. Here's your research question is, what are people in society afraid of?
We're queer, that's what we're afraid of, but no. No, it's really tricky. And a lot of the teachers that I've worked with, a lot of the fear comes from saying the wrong thing, or I don't know what to do in this situation. And it takes a lot to actually sit and unpack that and go, that's okay, because it's not a reflection of you as a teacher. You're not a bad teacher because you don't understand what trans means. It's just that you're a reflection of a school system that trained you to not think about those issues and to not understand what that means. And when you can open up the conversation like that, I think that's a much more productive space that can squash some of the fear and open up for positive and productive action. The other thing that I've worked with teachers to understand and work through is that it's okay to make those mistakes. You don't have to be fearful about making the mistakes, but you do have to, when making those mistakes, own up to them, apologize, and then work with students to move on. So one of the best examples that come to mind is I was working with a librarian who was trying to use the right pronouns for a student. And unfortunately, the librarian used the wrong pronouns. And it was a big incident of, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, I hope I didn't offend you. And it went on, and the students going, it's okay, look, please just use the correct ones. Oh, but I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And it's going on and on and on. And we were trying to unpack how that was actually shifting the librarian's sort of guilt and fear back onto the student and making the student feel like they have to say it's okay. So for me, part of tackling that fear is going, yeah, it's okay to make mistakes, and we're all learning, and we'll never be, in the next, I see, immediate future, fully anti-oppressive, just, socially inclusive educators. But we've got to make those steps forward. And for me, opening up that conversation and realizing it's not a reflection of you personally is a way to help tackle some of that fear.
Lisa Hunter, you probably get mispronounced all the time. What could be a tip to help folks to remember? Because we've had a few questions that came in around this one.
There's pronoun training for people that's available now. That it's a real hoot, but it is literally getting it into your body to even understand that there are options that people might want to take for various reasons. It's not about judging those reasons. It's just saying, okay, you want to be called Karen, I'll call you Karen. You want to be called she, her, I'll use those pronouns. That's good. And if I happen to say he and you correct me, I say, oh, sorry, and she again. So it is just it's a habit to get into your body. We've been enculturated largely to do he, she. I know some people particularly, no, I won't go there. Some people who won't use the word they because, it's a discussion around the history of language and that's seen as plural, so it's inappropriate. But when you really look at the history of language, it's shifting all the time, and they has been used principally for singular before it became plural. But anyway, it is a case of just practicing it and respecting what somebody asked for.
Yeah. So you mentioned pronoun training, like we have lots of different sorts of training here at Monash. So if I'm not really 100% sure whether alum are permitted to go to them, but you know what, just tell them Karen sent you, or we'll run one for you. But I think one of the, okay, how did that go from 15 to 5? Yeah, I know, I've got the timer, right? So, woo, okay. Ash, the she, her, they, them kind of in an Asian cultural practices, I mean, there's some complications with that, or how does it work? Like,
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I think in a lot of Asian language, a gendered language is not a thing. Like, for instance, in Mandarin, you would just say, you know, this person without any gender. But then I think that parts of Asia that has been colonized, I think we take a lot of the histories. For instance, in Singapore, part of the homophobic sort of laws that we've got were actually colonial legacies. For instance, there's a 377A law, which is a penal code, you know, back from way back when, that kind of criminalizes sex between gay men. And they uphold it till today, even though it's, you know, we have decolonized, sort of, we're independent. But yeah, so I think it's tricky because people have this multiple spaces and histories that they've been sort of intertwined. And you can't really, it's the fear of change, and it's the fear of, you know, kind of just leaving behind something that you've always known, that your parents have always known and have always used. Frankly, for me, I am embarrassed to say this, but I was 28 years old before I first heard of a pronoun thing. And it was actually in Monash, and somebody offered the pronoun to me, and I was like, how strange. So, you know, as a queer person myself, I'm like, even that for me was a bit of a learning experience. So I think culturally, there's a lot for us to sort of think about, people coming from everywhere and kind of learning some of these things and unlearning some of the things that they have always historically known.
yeah, and that's that intersectional kind of concept as well. I know we've got a few minutes to go. I'm going to ask the panel to really have a quick think now. If you had a take-home kind of comment or a message, tip, however you want to frame it, for our attendees, what would that be? Let's start with you, Left Terrace.
All right, so thank you, Karen. So I'll speak to specifically those who are working or might work with someone in a counselling or psychology setting. So my take-home message would be, young people, or in general, LGBTQIA plus people will be afraid of seeing us because of vulnerabilities, because of fear of being stigmatized further by us. If we are scared on our end of them as well, because we lack the training or because we lack confidence, then that will pass on to the clients. Probably you know about transference and counter transference that happens in those relationships. And the single most important factor in counseling settings is the relationship. That's the driving force of therapeutic outcomes. So we need to be authentic. We need to be to acknowledge any lack of knowledge, any lack of education, do our best to meet the person where they are, and also give them our word and do it, train up until we, and also seek supervision and peer support that is suitable and relevant to the practice.
Thank you. Lisa Hunter.
Be curious. As teachers, we're in the business of learning. So, you know, if there are acronyms or words or identities you're not aware of, you know, more than happy to point people to resources, which we will in a minute, as well as work that we can do to help there. But you know, we're very fortunate that we're in a country and a state where there are a lot of resources at our fingertips, and it might be a little scary at first to model pronouns, but it's really not hard once you've cracked it and done it once and done it twice. And I often see a lot of leadership from kids actually when we look at what they haven't been narrowed into thinking. So I think, there's some exciting times ahead because people are paying attention to how we can be better teachers and more equitable in how we think about education.
Thank you. I'd only add that I think queer experiences can differ quite a great deal culturally, and also people have different identities that they have to sort of navigate, and always just keep an open mind. I suppose that there's probably not one catch-all solution, and that maybe it might be complicated, but then it's always worthwhile because everyone deserves to feel safe and that they belong. Like,
you don't have to do this work alone. It can be really challenging if you're the only one going against the grain of an institution, going against the way of the norms of an institution. So harnessing collective potential, whether that be with colleagues, other teachers, students in schools, some of the most effective cultural practices or changes in cultural practices are ones that are led by students. So you don't have to do this work alone.
Yeah, so there you have it. Have a go. And if you are still afraid of having a go, take as much bling tonight as you need, because if you just wear it around, you'll just become that person who wears that stuff around. There's some posters over here as well I've been instructed to hand out. There's little pins, and make them part of your attire. So I would like to really thank you folks for joining in our session today. I really want to thank the panel for playing along with the script that got changed a little bit. Whoa, well done, and the time. And so round of applause for the panel, I think. So I'm sure we've got some questions in the room written on the back of napkins, sticky notes, in your phone, wherever they are. So you grab those. But also, meanwhile, we've been having a bit of a polling activity of questions as well, and through the Slido. So would you like to go to maybe one of those ones? Oh. Okay, let's go. All right, so in the room, we've got some questions up here, so that'll be voting, and that can happen. Has anyone got any questions from the floor for anyone in the panel or for us in general? Don't look up there. Anyone? Anyone? Yes. Yay! Woo-hoo!
Yeah, so Australia is comprised of lots of education communities and professional communities coming from other countries. Where Australia is has open room for this free discussion and inclusion. But coming from Southeast Asia, I'm coming from Sri Lanka, and we are like a few decades ago, 2 decades ago, it's very strict, and still it's very strict to come out or talk, or to straight people also to represent their friends who are undergoing lots of stress. I mean, because they have to be really not exposed, not coming out as who they are, but the main damage happened when they are, the full damage is happening during their school time. And also like when they are adults, when they want to pursue their careers in high elite sports or any other career, so they have to only their place was a seminary, declaring their brothers, or declining all their rights to stand up like a normal citizen. So so there should be like opening up from Australia. Yes, it's a big work maybe for the next coming years for straight people also to represent their friends and work together without thinking how we can enhance these opportunities and reduce damage, because half of the time we are then as adults, those people, disadvantaged people, they spend time on undamaging or really losing their lives. Yeah, So the next few years, I think the focus should be more open for the communities, we being able to reach out to those countries as well, and to say that, okay, no matter what culture or the religious beliefs or whatever, on humanitarian grounds and all the work happening in this topic, we should be able to help our fellow being allies.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's
so. I'm gonna pick up just a couple of things in there. I've heard you saying how difficult it is to stand up for people, especially if you don't identify as LGBTQIA plus. And I think if you want to have a little coming out, if you fit into there, you can do that today, and then consider yourselves blessed, and you can go on out and do that. Take your lanyard, put up your posters. The other thing that I heard in there was this idea about Australia-Asia relationships, and I'm going to ask Ash to maybe talk to that. The trouble of maybe supporting, like even a family member supporting someone who's coming out in an Asian culture. And then Lisa Hunter, the human rights angle there, I think, has probably got you all over it as well. What do you think about that, Ash?
Yeah, I think one thing that struck me in all of my migration experience is the fact that a lot of family members back home, they don't have the language. Just like I mentioned earlier, when I came here, I was really surprised about pronouns. I had to learn a lot of things and unlearn a lot of things myself, even as a queer person. So trying to extend that to my family or friends is quite tricky. So I think the language that we use and the approach that we use has to be differentiated slightly. And in my research, I look in a lot about the idea of coming out. Is that even a thing? Because a lot of my participants, for instance, that I have the pleasure of working with, they don't think that that's a necessary thing to live a full life. So for them, negotiating their own identities and their own culture would mean maybe living in, their own sort of cleaving spaces for themselves to have this, full lives without ever having to come out to their family necessarily, or without feeling like they have to have that difficult conversation or cutting the ties. Because in a lot of cultures, coming out would generally mean you are ostracized, you are no longer part of the family, or you are murdered. So that's a very big and decision to make. And so I think that being able to have that conversation, that maybe we don't need to look at queerness in the way we stereotypically look at it, which is coming out and wearing the rainbow stuff, being able to expose yourself, all those things, it might not apply in some context.
Lisa Hunter, I think the human rights angle, you've spoken a little bit about that. Just give us a little maybe take-home message about human rights and all rights and education.
Yeah, well, I think if we work with basic human rights, and we can look at policies to direct it, like the World Health Organization, the UN, etc. And then we can look at smaller groups like IRA, for instance, the Intersex Human Rights Association, that's very much more local for Australia, New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand, that says how we can pay attention to some of these sorts of issues that are ultimately about equity. And sure, there are lots of arguments still around who gets to even call what are human rights. But it is about, about society coming out, I suppose, and thinking about how society, somebody today at the national level was talking about social norms need to change. And whether we're talking about misogyny and racism, it doesn't matter. We really do need to change from a colonial institutionalized system to a place where people can thrive. And, that word's now a bit loaded, but to a place where people can really be who they are and they don't have to deal with discrimination in order to be able to contribute, basically. And many people need to do that only through the work of allies because they can't do it on their own. And for groups who are already dealing with oppression, for them to have to do the work, it's the allies that really have to do the heavy work. So it goes back to learning, unlearning. It might be through language. It might be through actually practicing ways of, putting your pronouns on your Zoom or saying, my name's Lisa Hunter, my pronouns are they, them, their, it sort of, rolls off the tongue after a while. But as an ally, you might cop it a bit too. And it's working through that, because I always think, well, as an ally, it's still a lot easier for me because of my privileges than some people who are working in oppressed areas.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Thank you. Was there any other questions from the floor? And then we'll take one from on the screen, because I know you're all excited about them. Anyone? Yes, there's a question. Yay.
I really liked the conversation around intersectionality. And I think you mentioned it a moment ago with NDIS participants, especially autistic and neurodiversity. So I was just wondering if anyone had any insights or experience working with that population.
Yeah, we kind of thought about that one. Yeah, Left Terrace, I'm hoping you can maybe draw some bows there. And I know that Blake wanted to talk a little bit about.
Yeah, so intersectionality specifically in working with people with disabilities or broadly? Autism, okay. Yeah, of course, autism has changed so much since, the definition of autism has changed since I started studying it, because of the mental health, the mental disorder criteria have changed so much. Look, yeah, I think we should be using the intersectionality lens across. I think mental state or mental health, mental well-being are the may form identities, or one of the intersecting identities that we could be using in our practice. So I would be looking at a strengths-based approach within intersectionality. Look, intersectionality has been traditionally seen as a way as a predisposing factor almost to mental health or mental well-being, as in a factor that may impact in some way. I like to see it as a protective factor as well, because due to experiencing intersectional discrimination and oppression, often people may find some unwarranted gains or some unsolicited benefits, whether it is some personal growth, some coping skills and mechanisms, some reflection, or they may have developed networks within the groups that they have formed parts of. So I would like to celebrate diversity and to look at the strengths. So I think it speaks to what you were saying earlier, Blake, too. Do you want to add anything to that?
I don't have anything to add to this one, but I'll jump in to the Slido question.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Was that? Yeah, definitely. I would say definitely an intersectional lens would fit there. Let's go for our Slido question then. I guess it's the one in blue. Is it the one at the top? What else can we do to move away from the onus of LGBTIQA plus people carrying their own baggage and coming out and doing their things, declaring their sexuality as a way that's not required? Oh, don't know. It's a lot to carry around, I can tell you right now. It's really hard. Well, maybe the they them pronoun starts that processes. The she hers, you start playing with gender, it's a nice in, I would say, to playing then with matters to do with sexuality. And we're talking here about some big terms here around cisgenderism as well, and also cis heteronormativity as well. So there's some big concepts in there, but yeah, I think mess around with gender, certainly. The onus will always be on people who claim their identities to claim their identities in the particular ways that they do. Now, whether they choose to speak them, as some of us have done in the past, and maybe not speak them, as some of us have also done in the past, or to wear them, or to change them, or to challenge them. I think the onus is going to stay on us to do that. But the onus now falls on you, and thank you for that question, and those around you to realise that is onus, that is a baggage, that is a thing to carry around, and it is quite heavy. And I can, in my playgrounds, like this person in the front row said, pay attention to those things and what's going on, and making an account of standing with someone. Blake, I'm sure you've probably got something to say about the onus on LGBTIQA plus people.
Yeah, when I read the question about you know, the onus to come out, it makes me think about why do people have to come out? And it's because you have to come out when you're not seen as the norm. And so for me, a way of helping to shift and carry some of that baggage away from queer young people is ensuring their representation in the school. Now, that's not just about teaching queer lives. It's also about destabilizing us seeing being straight and cisgender as the norm. So often, and it sort of links to one of the other questions about young people being impressionable, schools aren't, and I'm talking in the context of schools aren't a neutral place. They teach you how to be heterosexual. They teach you that men go with women. And so part of the work in shifting away from the need to come out is going, hey, that's a social construction too. So it's not just about bringing queerness into the classroom. It's also going, hey, this thing that we've been told is natural and normal and you must follow, you don't actually have to do that. And I think that's a really important way to help shift away some of that onus. But as I said earlier, there's no sort of magic pill that you just drop it and suddenly the onus goes away. You can approach it in very context-specific ways.
Yeah.
I wonder whether the question really is, as we talked about a bit earlier, how can we help education come out of the closet?
Yeah, well, you know, the problem is the
Society.
closet, right? I think we're all pretty familiar with that, and the very notion that someone has to come out, but not others having to come out, and that's where that kind of question comes from. But there's so many risks that are associated with that. So we're going to do We're the Club Cupboard. Looks like we're getting the wrap up from Professor Beans as well. So thank you again for panel for doing the Q&A, and now very quickly you have to go into the next thing.
Thank you so much, Karen, and the panel, and thank you all for all your questions. So I mean, it's been a fascinating and informative evening. I think you'll all agree. Some really deep discussions, some good nuances that we've got into there. We've had a taste of different resources. It's been awesome, and yeah, some key questions emerging. So just want to say a huge thank you to all our panelists. Well done, brilliant conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you to our amazing marketing team and technical team for all your efforts. Megan, as the alumni manager as well, thank you so much for facilitating the event. Just also to mention our upcoming events, which are on the screen now. Big shout out to the School of CTI Social Inclusion Week event, the new Australian curriculum, responding to a changing world for an equitable future. Jump on the link and you can register to come along to that. We get Karen back again for that to facilitate that panel, so definitely worth tuning in. And then a second panel presentation, innovative approaches to supporting the achievement, engagement and well-being of children and young people as well. So links on the screen and you can register for those to come and attend. So thank you everyone so much for your attendance, for your engagement, for your conversations. It's been a brilliant evening, and just wishing everyone a safe journey home, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.